Hey everybody, Greg Pruitt here with the Idaho Dispatch, and I am joined today by Mr. Bryan Smith. How are you?
Doing great.
Good. So Bryan is a candidate for the 2nd Congressional District here in Idaho. We've only got 2, so you're going for number 2, right?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So as far as I know, Congressman Simpson, has he announced that he's running for re-election?
That's kind of interesting. He hasn't personally announced. He has a campaign team, and I think his campaign manager, her name's Sarah Nelson, I believe that she has come out and said that he is running, but we have yet to hear from Mike that he's running. But he said,
Okay.
They say he is.
Okay. So the assumption that you're going under is that he is running for re-election and you're
Yes.
intending to challenge
Yes.
him. So, I guess why are you running? You actually ran previously against Congressman Simpson,
Right.
And giving it another go.
So, back in 2014, I ran against Congressman Simpson, and back in those days, I felt like he was completely out of touch with Idaho. You might remember programs that he supported, like remember the famous Cash for Clunkers. He supported programs like that, and also he voted for the $700 billion bank bailout. Remember that? At the time, I thought our national debt was way out of control. I think it was 19 or 20 trillion. And he also was a big spender, big government guy. He had also voted against some Second Amendment issues, and I opposed that. He was also a guy that he liked earmarks. He bragged about it. He thought earmarks were a great thing. He was out of touch with conservative Republicans in the state. And so for all those reasons, I ran against him in 2014. And frankly, since that time, he's only gotten worse. And so I'm now running against him again.
Okay. So you said that he's gotten worse. And so from that motivation the first time to run against him to now, because that was in 14 and we're now looking at 2022. So there's a giant gap in there.
Yeah.
What's the motivation now for 2022? What ultimately said, hey, I got to throw my name in the ring again?
So for the last 7 years, he's continued his voting for wild spending. He's a big spender, a big government guy. But he's also continued to be bad on the Second Amendment. For example, recently he voted for the National Defense Reauthorization Act. That had a provision in it. It was a red flag provision for the nation's military. It was a red flag law. He also voted to have, that bill also contained a provision to have women mandatorily sign up for the draft. I've got daughters. I don't believe in that. But he's also voted for like I said, mentioned big spending. He's also voted for amnesty for people who are here illegally. In fact, he's co-sponsored a bill that would do that. This year, he also co-sponsored a bill where he wants to make transgendered people he wants to give them special protected status. I disagree with that. Just recently, this I think it's called the Dobbs case. It's from Mississippi. This is the case that the Supreme Court heard recently. And in that case, it's a state law from Mississippi, and it prohibits having an abortion after 15 weeks. There were about 238 congressmen from the current Congress who voted in support of Mississippi's position. In fact, Fulcher and even Risch and Crapo as senators all supported Mississippi's law. Conspicuously absent from the amicus brief that was filed, Mike Simpson. And then on top of that, he voted for the January 6th Commission. This was, of course, after President Trump was not reelected. Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats fashioned a January 6th Commission, and that commission is investigating President Trump's involvement in the Capitol riots for January 6th. Well, this is something that is completely absurd. We shouldn't be spending time on this. Mike Simpson joined with the Democrats, and there was about 35 other Republicans, and is supporting this. Basically, it's a witch hunt of President Trump. Congressman Simpson did not support President Trump back in 2016. He said that President Trump was unfit for office, didn't support him. And then, of course, we now have, the cherry on the cake, or the pie, or however you want to call it. He now supports breaching. He's joined with four radical environmentalists to breach or destroy 4 dams on the lower Snake River. This is bad for farmers and ranchers. It's bad for Idaho. It's bad for utility ratepayers, and it's also bad for the Port of Lewiston. So when you look at the totality of where he's come, it's hard to imagine, but in my opinion, he's actually gotten worse than he was in 2014.
Okay, so that kind of drove you, the totality.
Yeah, so after I looked at all that, I know the people of Idaho want better. I know they deserve better. And for me, I'm an outspoken conservative. What we've been missing in Washington from Idaho is somebody who will speak up and speak out on conservative issues. We don't have somebody who does that. And so I know that's what the people want, and I'm not afraid to do that. In fact, I'm happy to do that, and I want to do that. So I want to be the people's voice in Washington on conservative issues. So when you add all that up, I'm back in the race.
Okay. So let's talk about some of those issues. Obviously you would do things differently than Mike Simpson has done. What are some of the key issues for Idahoans here in the 2nd Congressional District? What are your top 3 issues, let's say, that you want to go and fight for?
Well, one of the things we need to do is we need to restart building the Trump border wall, right? That was stopped as soon as Biden became president. And we need to send somebody back to Washington who will restart that. And I believe that people need to, that come here illegally, need to go home where they came from and request entry into the country legally, instead of letting people in by the tens of thousands illegally. So that's one issue. Another issue is that I believe that we have an issue with election integrity. And so people don't realize this, but many states don't require a photo ID or any kind of ID in order to vote. Now, Idaho does require a photo ID, but Pennsylvania, which was a controversial state during the last presidential election, it does not require a photo ID, or you don't even have to show them any ID. You don't have to show them a utility bill or a credit card or anything. You just show up and you say, my name is so-and-so and I'm here to vote. The problem with that is that, of course, I don't really care. I don't want the federal government to come in and take over state elections. Obviously not. But on a presidential election, we need to make sure that our elections have integrity. Why does that matter? It matters because if in Pennsylvania we have, let's say, voter fraud, people are showing up who shouldn't be voting, and they don't even have to show ID, what happens in Pennsylvania on a presidential election affects us in Idaho. So we should care about presidential elections in Pennsylvania or many of the other states that don't have any photo ID requirement or any ID requirement. Now, what's weird about this is there is a federal law that requires people to show photo ID or some sort of ID when they register to vote. But that same requirement doesn't apply federally when they go vote. And so I don't care what Pennsylvania does with their judges or their legislators, but particularly we've just seen this in a presidential election. We need to have election integrity across the nation when we select our president. Otherwise, if we have fraud or dishonesty in other states, it dilutes what we do here in Idaho. So I think that's an important issue. I also think that we have, I support President Trump's America First agenda. For far too long, we've had America last, or next to last, or not first. And there's many components to that. And I won't get into all those, but there is one in particular that I really feel strongly about. Our country, our nation, our federal government was based on 3 branches of government: the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And the legislative branch is supposed to make the law, and the executive branch is supposed to enforce or enact the law, and then the judicial branch, that's the branch that interprets the law. And we have these 3 separation of powers divisions in our government. Well, when it comes to the regulatory branch, and this is one of the parts of the America First agenda, in the regulatory branch, it's not really a branch at all. It's just a regulatory agency, but it has become a de facto 4th branch of government. But what does that mean? What that means is that Congress has gotten so big that they cannot manage all the affairs of government. And so they have delegated their duties off to the regulatory people. The law is that when a regulatory body creates a rule, that rule has the effect of law. So that means that the regulators can legislate. They're also the ones that come forward and they enforce the law. And they also interpret the law. So you have all three separation of powers that we normally have dispersed throughout the federal government are now consolidated in the regulatory arm of government. And these people back there, these folks that run the regulatory agencies, they don't care whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. They're like barnacles on a ship, and you can't scrape them off. And they just want to move forward and regulate. And see, that's what happened with Biden, right? Biden said, I'm going to come up with a vaccine mandate. And if you've got more than 100 employees, we're going to call it an OSHA violation. Yeah, and OSHA will promulgate this rule, and they're going to enforce the rule, and then they're going to issue the penalties, and then they'll decide whether or not, just like a court would normally decide, whether or not you have to pay the penalty. And the way the law works is that when a regulatory agency finds you, then you can appeal to a federal court. The problem is the standard of review in those cases gives deference to the regulatory people. So what we have now is a system where we have regulation run amok in this country, and we have the regulators, they create the law, they enforce the law, they interpret the law, and they get deference for all of that. And that's part of the America First agenda. So when you ask me three things, I'd say we need to restart building the Trump border wall, we need to have election integrity, and we need to focus on America first. So those are three things I think that are important.
Okay. Now, one of the questions everybody always has for congressional candidates is obviously the divide in Congress, right? There's, right now the Democrats, they barely control the Senate, they control the House barely, and they control the presidency. 2022, a lot of the pundits say Republicans are likely to pick up the House, possibly pick up the Senate, and then obviously you would have a Democrat president. And so how do you deal with the roadblocks within, not just within, between party and party, but also within the Republican Party itself? Like President Trump has been criticizing, Republican Party leadership, such as Mitch McConnell lately. How do you go in and deal with that as a brand new freshman congressman if you were to win?
Well, okay, so there's a lot to unpack with that question, Greg.
Yeah.
But so first of all, let's take the Democrats, right? I represent the people of Idaho. That's who I would represent as the congressman, and I'm going to represent them. I've been a lawyer, as people know, for 30 years. My clients keep coming back to me because I do a good job representing them. How do I know? Because they keep coming back. I represent them, they come back. As a congressman, I would do the same thing. I would represent the interests of the people of Idaho, and I know what they want. What they want is they want less government. They want the boot of government off of their neck. They want less regulation. They want less taxes. They don't want vaccine mandates. They don't want big deficits. We're now almost $30 trillion in debt. By the way, when I ran the first time, I thought the deficit was high. It was about 19 trillion. Now it's almost 30. And so I know what the people of Idaho want. Now, whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican or you're a Bernie Sanders independent or whoever you are, I'm still going to represent the people of Idaho on their values and what they want me to represent them on. So it doesn't really matter who I'm dealing with or what their political persuasion is. I will represent the people of Idaho, and sometimes that will work and sometimes it won't. For example, people know that I have been and still am a big supporter of repealing the grocery sales tax in Idaho, all right? That is something that Democrats want as well. It's been Republicans in the House and the Senate that have stopped that. In fact, it was a Republican governor in this state who vetoed the grocery sales tax repeal. You might remember that, right? And look, I'll call the Republican out. I mean, if the governor shouldn't have vetoed that. That's something that everybody should want. And so it doesn't matter to me whether it's a Democrat or whether it's a Republican. I'm going to represent good policy, and I'm going to represent the people of Idaho, and that's what I'll do.
Okay. What do you do in situations where, one of the things that you'll hear a lot of people talk about is you brought up earmarks, okay? And, one of the people talk about congressional bills and where it's like, hey, I'm going to vote against this. And then all of a sudden, leadership comes up to you and says, hey, you know what? We can help you out with this issue you've got here in the second Congressional District of Idaho. We'll throw that in there if we can get your vote, right? And that's typically what people talk about with earmarks. And everybody says that they hate earmarks, but then they always seem to happen, right? Every bill that passes through Congress seems to have a whole lot of stuff put in there that has nothing to do with the actual bill itself. And so how would you deal with that?
So you might remember back in the day when we got Obamacare, it was passed with 60 votes from the Senate. Remember that? And they needed a 60th vote. So what did they do? They went to the senator, I think he was from either Kansas or Nebraska or Oklahoma somewhere, and they wanted that person's vote. So they just kept sweetening, what can we give you for your state to get that? And this is somebody, when you do that, you are now putting party politics over your principles, all right? I don't believe in that. I'd have to look specifically at what it was, because you have to sometimes, you have to look at it and say, okay, what can we do, all right? But you cannot compromise away your principles, otherwise you're not representing the people in the state. People in this state would rather have a congressman stand up for his principles and not get a bill passed than compromise his principles and get one. I can give you a good example. Right now, there are a lot of people in this state that are not happy with our senators who voted in favor of the 1.2, 1.4, I can't remember how much it was, $1 trillion infrastructure bill that only gave, a pittance to the states. Look, are there some good things in there? Yes, there are. But they're way outweighed by all the bad stuff that was thrown in that bill. And people are not happy about it. I would not have voted for that infrastructure bill for that very reason. Yeah, there might have been some good stuff in there that could help Idaho, but when you look at what they did, on balance, it wasn't even a close call in my mind, is something you wouldn't vote for. So with me, they would see somebody who is not a fan of earmarks, not a fan of people compromising their principles, and I wouldn't do it. And I'd also tell you this, it's not a bad thing if Congress doesn't get a lot of bills passed. In fact, there are many days and weeks when we would be better off if Congress didn't get bills passed or get laws passed. For example, it'd be better off, it wasn't a bill, but President Biden wanted to have a vaccine mandate. Almost anything that Nancy Pelosi wants to do is probably not a good thing. So the fact that some things aren't happening doesn't necessarily mean that that's bad either.
All right, so you've got the issues laid out that you want to fight for Idahoans on your campaign. Have you been out campaigning?
Oh yeah, I've been crisscrossing the district. In fact, I have an event tonight in Idaho Falls. I've been probably in 40% or 50% of the counties by now.
Okay, actually, real quick, now that we've mentioned, this is not a statewide race; it's a district. So, can you kind of explain for maybe those that don't know what the second congressional district covers?
That's a good point. So, Idaho has two congressional districts: the first and the second. The second congressional district goes from Wyoming all the way west towards Boise. And it takes in a substantial part of Boise, and maybe half of, a good portion of it. I'm not exactly sure numerically how much, but I actually drove it last Saturday because there's been redistricting. It now goes all the way to North Eagle Road, all the way north to a place called, I think it's called Avamore. Mm-hmm. It's a new subdivision there. And it goes down to Victory, and then it heads south, pretty much, then it goes to Elmore County, and then to all the way south to the Utah border and back east, all the way to Franklin County, Oneida County, and Bear Lake County, and then back up to Idaho Falls, Fremont County, and it also takes in Lemhi County. So it's a very big district. It takes a long time to drive across it. That's the second congressional district.
Okay. All right, so let's talk about, in my interviews, I try to bring up things where people have criticized you or any candidate for something, and I try to give them an opportunity to respond and talk about those issues. that may come up on the campaign trail. And so just having, done research and knowing one of the criticisms that people have is your job and what you do as a job, and I guess debt collection. I don't know if that's the proper way to term what you do, but
yeah, that's one of the things we do.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess, some people may bring that up as a criticism on, hey, we can't trust Bryan because he goes after people and, that haven't paid their medical bills. And so what would be your response to those folks and who may have a concern with your work?
It's interesting. People bring that up. It's because they don't have anything else negative to say about me. They don't argue in a Republican primary that my policies are too liberal. They don't say things like he wants to breach dams, he's soft on the Second Amendment. They don't say he votes, he supports amnesty for illegals. It's nothing to do with any policy I have. The only thing they can find that they want to dredge up or drag up is that I'm a lawyer who does debt collection work. And I'm a really famous one because I do medical debt collection work. And so, I've already got one strike against me, I suppose, because I'm a lawyer. People don't like lawyers. They haven't liked them since the time of Shakespeare, right? Yet Jim Risch is a lawyer. Mike Crapo is a lawyer. Other people serve. Raul Labrador is a lawyer. And so, they don't like me because I'm a lawyer, they say. And then they say, the other thing is you do debt collection work. And not only that, but you do medical debt collection work. And that's become a bigger issue over the years because people now believe that healthcare should be free. With various things, but healthcare should not be free. It's like any other service, and so I have clients come to me and they want to get paid. In fact, I've had county hospitals. I've represented several county hospitals that if we don't collect the debt for them, then the taxpayer gets to pay the unpaid bill. And so that's been an issue. They come up with that, and I think it's kind of sad on one hand because right now we're kind of watching the Titanic sink in the United States. We've got a fiasco with Afghanistan withdrawal. We've got runaway inflation. We've got porous borders on the South. We've got a president who is not awake at the helm. We have critical race theory. We have all kinds of issues, but my detractors want to talk about, well, yeah, but you're a medical debt collector. And here's what I would tell you. When they raise that, what they usually like to say is, you're a debt collector, and that's not so bad. People should pay their bills. But the thing that we don't like is you charge excessive fees. Yeah, that's what you do. You add stuff onto the bill, and you're unethical, and you add fees on that are excessive. And they don't even know what they're talking about. Let me tell you what I mean by that. The debt industry, medical debt collection in particular, is governed by various state and federal agencies and boards. Let me just name some of them for you. We are regulated, and this is the regulation it's talking about. We're regulated by the Federal Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, the most comprehensive body of debt collection law that applies across the United States. We're also regulated by the Federal Fraud Protection Bureau. We're also regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. We're also regulated by what's it called? It's the Fair Credit Reporting Act. We're also regulated by a federal telecommunications act. In Idaho, we have the Idaho Collection Agency Act that regulates us. We are regulated by the director of the Department of Finance. This person has the power under code to come in at any time and do a spot audit or a spot inspection. They have subpoena power. They can field complaints. So we're regulated by that person. We're also regulated by the Idaho Consumer Protection Act that prevents any kind of false or misleading or deceptive or untrue statements in connection with commerce. We're also regulated by the Attorney General, who has power to come in and do investigations. And if that weren't enough, because I'm a lawyer who does debt collection, I'm also regulated by the Idaho Supreme Court for unethical behavior, and I'm also regulated by the court system. Those are 11 various bodies, state and federal bodies, that regulate what we do, all right? And these guys that run these regulatory guys, it's their job. I mean, if they can go shut somebody down, or if they can score brownie points at their job, go to their boss or supervisor and say, look, we just caught these guys doing this or doing that. That's what they love to do. So if we were doing things that were unethical or things that weren't allowed by law, or if we were violating the law somehow, anybody could go, let's just pick one. They could go to the director of the Department of Finance. He has authority to come in and investigate and send us letters, and they've got investigators, they do that. And so what you see is we've never gotten a cease and desist letter. We've never there's never been any action taken on a complaint other than an initial investigation. And then once we show them what the true facts are, they've always dropped it. I've never been investigated by the, the state bar. So if people want to, if they think that we've been unethical, they can go to the state bar and file a complaint. I've never gotten one of those in connection with debt collection. There may have been one or two where people did file a complaint. They said, oh, he did this or that. But as soon as we showed them what happened, it's never gone any further than that. So my point is this. Nobody that I know of is more highly regulated than the debt collection industry. Could you imagine any other business being regulated by as many as 11 different federal and state boards and agencies? And so what I'm telling you is that if there was any truth to any of the wild claims made about me in the debt collection, then one of these agencies or multiple of these agencies could have done something, and you would have seen it in the paper, action taken, cease and desist letter, something taken, but nothing has happened. And in particular, people have complained and they've said, Smith charges excessive fees. Well, the truth is that in debt collection, I represent my client. I don't represent the person who didn't pay their bill. They don't say the person didn't pay their bill and got sued for it. What they say is Smith tacked on an excessive fee. That's never been proven anywhere, ever, not one time, because we follow the law that allows you to charge interest and attorney's fees and costs. And in fact, what I would tell you is this. Every time we sue somebody, when we get a fee, it's awarded by the court. We have to go to the court and make application, and the court tells us how much we get paid. How would you like it in your job if before you got your paycheck, you had to go to a government regulator, make an application and say, well, listen, I want to make an application before I get my paycheck. So we're one of the few industries where we don't get paid unless a third party, in this case a judge, steps in and approves what we're seeking for payment. So what you see with these wild claims that they've made about debt collection, it's just totally fake news. It's exactly what it is. And in fact, I would tell you, is it possible that the media could create and generate so much fake news on a real conservative because they don't like him being conservative, that people could judge him and find him guilty and want to execute him, and it turns out the whole thing is fake? Well, that's exactly what happened to Trump in the Russia collusion gate, right? The MSNBC, CNN, the news media, they had a heyday for 2 years, if not longer. We now have evidence that I've got it from good sources, that Trump is guilty of Russia collusion. And what happened in the end? When it was all over, they did an investigation, zero evidence. It was all fake news, and it was promulgated by who? Trump's enemies. And look, I'm a conservative. I'm an outspoken conservative. I can tell you the newspapers don't like me because they tend to be liberal. There are liberals in the state who pretend to be conservative. They don't like me. If I didn't have people who didn't like me, I'd be selling ice cream instead of being a lawyer who does debt collection. So I'm telling you that all of that was fake news. It happened to President Trump. It happened to me, and it's got absolutely nothing to do with my ability to be a congressman. But I would tell you this: those complaints came from people that I sued representing my clients. You don't ever hear my clients complaining. My clients liked the job I did representing them, and as the congressman of the 2nd Congressional District, I believe people will like the job I do supporting conservative issues in Washington.
Okay. So one last thing, and then we'll have you do a pitch to the citizens.
Happy to do that, right.
You talked about kind of the policies, and in Idaho there is a divide between what some people say is right-wing conservatism and more moderate conservatism, and then you have the Democrats and the liberals on the left and so forth. So there is a big battle. Idaho's a very Republican state. Everything is controlled by Republicans from the top to the bottom. Both congressional seats have been Republican for a long time. So what, do you think that you're going to face some criticism for, hey, you're too conservative, you're part of the right-wing people that, is hurting Idaho politics? That'll be a criticism you might face. And so what would you say to those folks?
Look, I'm running in a Republican primary. And so I think as a Republican, I should be judged based on the Republican Party platform. And so tell me, what is it about our platform that people disagree with? When people come and say, oh, Smith is bad, he's right-wing, you look at those people. I mean, I just saw one yesterday. You've got former Justice Jim Jones is running around the state telling people he wants a jungle primary. This is a primary where you throw everybody in the mix. It's the way you get the most liberal person representing the state. And he will say, I used to be a former Republican. Many of these people who are complaining about Republicans being too conservatives, take Bruce Newcomb. I saw he's in a new PAC yesterday. He used to be a registered Democrat. He was the Speaker of the House many years ago in the legislature. So a lot of these people who are complaining about Republicans being too conservative, these are in fact people who are not Republican, or they're Democrats, or they're just liberals is what they are. And so I would say, you want to judge me on whether I'm, too extreme. I have told people over and over again, name one policy that I have, that I support, that you disagree with. This happened yesterday. A friend of mine that used to work in my law office, she was a secretary, she saw me, she says, oh, Smith, I don't know if I can vote for you. The newspaper says you're kind of extreme. And I said, okay, tell me, name one policy that I've ever espoused, ever suggested that you think is too extreme. Sat there. Well, I can't think of any right now. So what you see is a lot of label throwing, name calling, and this is by the liberal media, the Post-Register, the Idaho Statesman, the Standard Journal, the Twin Falls News. These people will say that, and people who aren't following the party platform will say that. But in terms of what I believe in the Republican Party platform, and I have yet to hear anybody who's pointed to something in the platform and said, oh, this is what our platform wants you to do, and you want to do something different. Now, I can easily do that with Congressman Simpson. Our platform wants us to have hydroelectric dams. He wants to breach them. Our platform supports the Second Amendment. He's voted against it. Our platform also wants us to have election integrity. Our platform wants us to have many things. He doesn't support those. But nobody can point to anything in the platform of the Republican Party platform and find something and say, oh, Smith is out of touch with the platform. So that'd be my response.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the last thing, you can address the camera there and plug your website and all that stuff and give your pitch to the citizens.
Great. So, look, this election is going to have it's going to be a defining moment in history between Congressman Simpson and myself. With Congressman Simpson, we have a 22-year Washington, D.C. insider. He's been there so long, he's lost touch with his constituents. In fact, here's how I would tell you. I can prove that. There is absolutely no way Congressman Simpson, if he were running for office for the first time today, would come to Idaho and say, look, I've never run before, but I've got a great idea that I want to pitch to the people of Idaho. We need to breach 4 dams on the lower Snake River. Now, I know it's going to hurt farmers and ranchers, but we're going to have to pay them $33.5 billion to recover from that. It's also going to destroy the Port of Lewiston, but there will be money set aside for them. I know that it'll destroy clean, emission-free hydroelectric power at the dams, but we're going to rely on future battery technology, and we're going to rely on wind and solar power. Or we might even try to build a nuclear power plant, something we haven't done in this country for 40 years. If he were running for the first time, there's no way he would come up with what I think is an absurd proposal. But this is what you get with somebody who's been there for way too long. Or we can pick somebody like myself. Unlike Congressman Simpson, who did not support President Trump in his first bid for election in 2016, last year I was one of 32 delegates at the Republican National Convention chosen to represent President Trump. I'm a true conservative. I'm an outspoken conservative, and I could use your help. With your help, we can make a difference and we can send a real conservative back to Washington to speak out and represent conservatives in Idaho. Now, finally, what I tell you is I could use your help by going to bryansmithforidaho.com. There you can sign up as a volunteer. You can register and help us so we can send a real conservative back to Washington. And you could also click the donate button and help us financially so that we can win this race.
All right. Thank you for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you.